Oh, thank you. Well, thank you very much. So I guess this is something a bit different, a bit away from engineering. When I was developing my SPH class, wondering, is there any other interdisciplinary skills that we can apply the methodology, and therefore we looked to apply it into marine biology. So this piece of work is not developed all by myself. It's shared work with collaboration with Dr. Jogulas from University of Strathclyde, as well as Seb Heinig at Edinburgh. And this piece of work sort of, it's part of a journey. It started off in 2018 to explore ideas of how we take SPH forward into other areas. And throughout the time, we've published a few papers. And what I'm presenting today is to talk about the work that we've done so far and some of the upcoming stuff that we hope to publish soon. So I'll start off with the big unknown. What are cold water corals? Okay. Cold water corals are just like your tropical water corals, but cold water corals are a lot more shy. They don't stand out as much. They are usually white and bland, not like the colorful tropical corals that you see in brochures on TV. But they are found throughout the world, and they are very important. And they usually live, you can find them as shallow as about 40 to 30 meters below the sea, and up to as deep as 3 kilometers down. They are an important resource, an important natural resource, because it's a spawning ground for a lot of habitats for a lot of fisheries, for example, and it's a crucial habitat for commercial fisheries such as cod, habit, and crabs and lobsters. So it's an important natural resource. Now we have quite a population of cold water corals off to the north and west of the UK, and as well as along the Scandinavian coast. And these corals, cold water corals, they actually survive by catching prey. Now, you don't usually associate corals with them catching prey, but they do. That's the only means of survival. They don't do photosynthesis like their tropical corals do, but they have tiny polyps, and these tiny polyps, as you can see in the diagram there, they capture planktons, and that is their source of energy. So the main thing here is the survivability of the cold water corals dependent on how much nutrients or how much food they could capture. And to allow them to capture food, the hydrodynamic environment must be right. And that brings us to the Goldilocks zone, the Goldilocks principle. So it's the condition where the corals thrive, and that graph right there sort of represents the ability for corals to capture prey, planktons, and it depends a lot on the current velocity under the seabed, on the seabed, as well as around the flow around the coral. So a current velocity that's too small doesn't mean that the coral gets a higher chance of catching their prey. These tiny planktons, they can swim away, and a current velocity that's too slow also prevents coral downstream from getting more food, because the corals upstream would catch all of the prey, while the coral downstream would then starve. Okay, and obviously, if the current velocity is too high, the corals, the chance of catching all these tiny planktons become a lot smaller. Now, when you think of corals, you think of giant mounds and those mounds are corals. Yes, but live corals are usually those that stay on top of the mound. The majority of the mound, 80 to 90% of the mound, which is the bottom of the coral skeleton you don't see, they're actually dead corals. And those are calcified structures. Okay, and so if you see a coral mound, usually it's between 10 to 20% that's alive. The rest is actually just framework structures that help support them. And they grow on top. So as they die, they calcify. Younger corals, they grow on top and they grow and build. Now, what's very important here is as they grow, they require, like we say, capturing prey, therefore food and energy. We will then build on this using by developing a growth model into SPH to predict the growth and death of corals, and by modeling how much prey a coral can actually capture, and then model the amount of energy that they retain from the food they have, we can then model the survivability of corals. So the picture right here, I think the picture on top with the coral there, it's a nice picture showing that the majority of the coral that you see at the bottom is dead coral, and it's only the top layer, the white bit on top, that's live corals. And to solve this in SPH, what we've done is it's a fluid solid interaction, and we saw traditional mass and momentum conservation equation, and time integration here. It's a bit of a fudge factor because coral grows very slow. It's a multi-scale problem. They grow about 10 centimeters a year, and it's going to be impossible to model, to simulate coral growth using any CFD approach. So the time integration here is just a way of monitoring growth steps. Okay. So coral could die and grow depending on the flow conditions. So the first thing we look at is look at the energetic reserves for our growth model. So we scoured the literature and find that 10 to 27% of corals are actually live corals. The rest of the mound are dead corals, and we try to model that with our SPH growth model that we developed. So we tested the first one on top, where we have the live coral, where we specify an infinite energetic reserve. That means each coral particle represented by our SPH particle has got lots of energy, and they won't starve, and therefore they survive and they grow. Okay. Now the one in the middle represents when there is very little, when the coral particles in SPH retains very little energy. Okay, and it does show that they survive somewhat, they grow somewhat, and then they die very quickly. Okay, so that there is a factor that we have to implement to make sure that whatever we simulate, we stay within that blue line from what's reported in the experiment. So that's how we managed to get the energetic reserve growth model to match with coral growth compared to those that's in literature. So once we got the growth model correct, we need to then look at the nutrients, i.e. the planktons. Okay, so and we've observed that using look at the diagram on the left, when there's very little nutrients coming in, very little food coming in, corals, our simulated coral show that they compete and tend to grow upstream. Okay, as you increase the nutrients in the seawater, in the water coming in, you find that they then tend to grow downstream. Now this again matches with what we find from literature and those that marine biologists observe, where when you have lots of source of food, the corals growing downstream of the mound still get an ample supply to survive. Now, that does not mean that when you have lots of food, that the coral will keep growing, because as you see, the graph at the bottom here, and we sort of simulated as well, and matches with those observed in experiments in the field, that the average lifespan of our coral tend to be a lot lower, even though there is a lot more food. Now, you may think otherwise, but this is due to the fact that because when you have lots of food coming in, the coral grow, and when they grow, they change the hydrodynamics around the coral as well. So that makes it less favorable for the flow condition to flow over it, to allow the polyps to capture prey. So it's a competitive process. So it doesn't mean that loss of food means coral will grow. Yes, they will grow to a certain extent, but then they tend to die off very quickly because of either competition, or either because when they grow, they change the shape, the mouth, the shape of the mouth changes, and therefore the hydrodynamics changes. So it's quite interesting. And then we come to tackle the problem of ocean acidification. And because the mouth of our corals, they are all, the live corals are all sitting on dead corals. And the dead corals down there are actually calcium carbonate. And with acid, the ocean being more acidic, this layer tend to dissolve. Okay, and over time, you get corals collapsing. So we try to simulate that effect as well. So over many time steps, over long time scales, we grow the SPH coral particle, and then we apply a dissolution factor, and then that dissolves the frame underneath, and we see the coral, the live coral particles sort of has dropped down to the bottom of the seabed, and therefore they have then grow from there again. So that's illustrated in here. What we've done there is increase the acidity of the water, and at some stage, the growth of the coral is stunted, and therefore, you get coral growing like this. So you don't get a nice coral mound. And again, we've checked with marine biologists, and it matches with what they see. So that's very promising. Last of all, this is still work in progress. We look at how do we restore corals. So we look at how do we maybe engineer habitat for corals to grow more favorably. So we looked at using monopiles. So we have a pole, for example, in this, and we see corals at certain locations. This is actually done by group researchers in the US off the coast of Mexico, where they actually seek corals on artificial structures to promote growth of corals in that area. And we see that by changing the size of the pole, it affects how coral grow, and therefore, because as they grow, they change the hydrodynamics around it, and you get coral growth in different shapes and sizes. Note again, the live corals are the red particles, the dead ones, the skeleton corals are the brown ones in there. So besides that, we also looked at changing the incoming current velocity. And it does have a significant effect. Therefore, we felt that analyzing structures, so perhaps using offshore renewable energy structures that are being decommissioned. I mean, I know the law now says it does say that anything you install under the seabed have to be removed, but can some of them then be retained, saving costs from removing them, but creates a nice habitat for fisheries, corals, or even aqua farming, for example. So yeah, I believe there's a lot of scope in this. I think this is a very exciting area for SPH and for fluid structure interaction, because we apply SPH not just in the traditional engineering sense, looking at wave rates and flow of droplets and all that, but we look at how we apply it in a different area. And obviously, more work in 3D models have to be done. It's computationally expensive. So I like Stephen's idea of using thinking of how do we maybe use that to couple that with some structural mechanics solver as well, because the fluid structure interaction is important. There are also plans to look at not just modeling the cold water corals, but tropical corals. But with tropical corals, that comes with added complexity, because tropical corals, they have tiny polyps to capture prey, but they also do photosynthesis. So energy will have to come from sunlight as well. But then you have the added complexity, because tropical corals are usually found in a lot shallow waters, and therefore tides, current, and waves, they all play a role. So this makes predicting or engineering coral growth a lot more complicated than it seems. Last of all, I'd like to thank some of the funds that actually help allow this research possible. Thank you very much.
Very nice, thank you, Yeaw Chu. Very nice. Any questions?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Can you explain the growth and depth models? So they have some energy, and then if they don't eat for some time, that energy decays.
That's correct. Exactly. So when they get to feed, we set a certain amount of energy, let's say 1, and then after let's say 10 or 100 times that, if they don't get to feed, then that energy goes down, and if the flow is still suboptimal, then if it reaches 0, they die. So
And how do they grow?
sorry.
What is the mechanism for growth?
So they branch off. So we model that using SPH, where we look at around. So we have a SPH seed, coral seed, and then we look at the hydrodynamics around it. So whichever direction where the velocity field is most favorable, we introduce a new coral particle. And then when you have that coral particle, after a few time steps, and if it has enough energy above a certain energy threshold, we look at the surrounding field again, and oh, it's more favorable here, so it goes in that particle there. So yeah, it's in a nutshell. Yeah.
Any other questions?
So when you're, I'm just I'm kind of doing this. So I'm just checking whether they can hear that question as well.
Okay.
Online.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we need to repeat it or
Maybe we should use them.
but for now, I'll speak. Is there a potential for doing this using sort of a porosity model approach rather than direct stimulus?
Yes. So
what are the benefits?
yes. So the porosity approach sounds very interesting, but because coral comes in different shapes and sizes depending on the species, the one that we model here is based on the Lopelia medusa species. They branch out quite evenly. Some coral species they are like sticks. So
But it's the slightly erratic behavior of the coral.
That's correct.
I think it's accurate.
that's
I
correct.
wonder if there's potential for doing sort of localized, a bit like as you would using an idea approach, for example. You know, if I talked about idea earlier, you wouldn't necessarily directly simulate something in a macroscopic CFD using MD. You might simulate some sort of material rocks, for example, and then couple it in. And so you might simulate something that is then coupled into the viscosity calculated.
Yes.
CFD. I wonder if there's potential for sort of localized simulations and parameterizing macroscopic.
Yes, I think there is. So what you say does make sense. We have thought about it. It's something that we need to explore as well. So it's yes, excellent.
Is there an online question?
No, yes, there isn't. It's just it's not clear.
Okay.
They can't hear us, so we need to microphone or channels or.
So we've got the mic on.
Yeah, maybe just following on from that. I guess the validation that you can do. Just following on from that, the validation that you can do, I mentioned, would you look at the growth shapes and see what nature actually provides, but also probably on the properties of porosity. So if you have a material which grows in a complex way, can you take analysis of that and say, this is a porous material, and what is the real porosity of the coral look like with all the different branches? And is your structure mimicking what you see in reality? So not just the front, but also the structure inside. As instrumentation.
No, you have a very valid point. I mean, looking at how it grows and measuring the porosity. We've not gone into detail in that, but it is something that we've been thinking about. Can we do something? So what we thought was, can we make the model a lot easier rather than modeling each and every branch, but we can then represent it as a bulk porosity and give it a rough permeability. But then that would take away the advantage of using a particle technique. So we thought staying true to SPH, we kept the particle approach. And if the dead coral have to dissolve due to acidity of the water, then it dissolves, the top layer just drop down. So we try to keep it simple in that sense. But what you mentioned there is very interesting. If we look at the colony as a whole, as a bigger one, then that does make a lot of sense.
Any in-room questions? Any online questions?
No, other than that,
Very good.
Go ahead.
Have you thought about changing the flow directions and seeing what happens? So you say now the flow is only in one direction, but you 10 centimeters a year, your current's going to change, you have a lot of things. What happens if you change the flow dynamic? Does the coral end up being a nice sphere?
Ideally, yes. If the flow changes direction, it will end up with a nice sphere. But what you usually find observe in the sea, that a lot of coral mounds, they are shaped like a cigar. They are not round, they are cigar shaped. And that tells us that it's affected by the mean, the average velocity that this colony of coral sees. And there are other shapes as well called Wilson rings. Again, that one would probably denote that the direction of the flow is much more uniform in all directions. But a lot of the underwater ones, they are all cigar shaped. So shaped like an aerofoil, cigar shaped. Yes.
Okay, right. I think we best want to close there. So can we thank you again, please?